Number 11, multiply negative 8 times a negative 5 times a negative 100 times a negative 7. Well, there's two ways to think about this problem. First of all, you could just multiply negative 8 times negative 5. That's going to give you a plus 40 times negative 100 will be a negative 4,000. You see how you have 4 times 1? You even up at 4 times 1, you write the 4 with how many zeros? 1, 2, 3 zeros. You have 1 times 4 and add 3 zeros. Okay? Anyway, a negative times a positive is a negative, and then a negative times a negative is a what? Negative times negative is a positive. You have 7 times 4 is 28 with 3 zeros. Now let's note a little bit here. Let's just think for a minute. If none of these numbers were negative and you multiply it, you get plus 28. If one of these numbers was negative, it can't be the same as none of them, so one of them is going to be minus, isn't it? Okay? So if one of them is minus, the product is minus. Now what happens if you have two negatives? What if this one and this one are negative? Okay? Well, two negatives is the opposite of one negative, isn't it? And we know that one negative was negative, didn't it? So 2 is like positive, isn't it? It's just like 0 negatives, isn't it? These two kind of cancel each other out, don't they? Alright, so one negative is negative, two negatives is plus. What if you had 3 negatives? What if the 5 was negative also? Now you have 3. That can't be like 2, can it? But it can be like 1. See, 1 and 3 have the same sign for the product, don't they? Look, the product's either going to be plus or it's minus. One of the two. If the last one you did was a plus, then this has to be a minus, okay? Alright, see where we're getting at here? You have 1 is the same thing as 3, and 2 is like not having any at all, are you? What happens if you have 4? Well, now it can't be like 3. 3 gave you a minus, so 4 has to be plus. So 4 of them is like 2 of them, which is like none of them, and you know if you don't have any negatives at all, it's going to be plus. So if you have 0 negatives, or 2 negatives, or 4 negatives, or 6 negatives, or 8 negatives, or 10 negatives, or 12 negatives, it's like not having any negatives at all. And you know if you don't have any negatives at all, it's a plus. And if you have 1, or 3, or 5 negatives, or 7 negatives, or 9 negatives, it's all like 1 negative. Okay? Now, what do you know about the numbers 0 and 2 and 4? Those are even numbers, aren't they? Well, with an even number of negatives, 0 negatives, or 2 negatives, or 4 negatives, it's like having 0 negatives, and that gives you a what? The positive product. Okay? So on my answer up here, I had 4 negatives. That gave me a positive number. Now, what if we had an odd number like 1, or 3, or 5, or 7? What do you think if we had 1 negative, what's it going to be? Well, 3 is just like 1, isn't it? So if 3 is like 1, they're both going to be what? 1 and 3 and 5 and 7 and 9. An odd number of negatives gives you a negative product. Okay? So if I had 3 negatives in here, if one of these had been a plus, I'd have a negative answer here. So we don't have to do just 2 of these at a time. Okay? For the sign. We can count the negatives. If it's an even number, it gives you plus. An odd number gives you minus.